Who is this guy? Shouldn't he be focusing on preaching sermons or pastoring his church? Hello Saints, my name is Jeff, and I'm a pastor exploring everything I can about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it's really hard to believe, but I am at the 1-year anniversary of launching this channel. I've released dozens of videos as I've been on this quest, sort of chronicling my journey, learning about this faith group that in some ways is really similar to Midwestern evangelical Christianity, which is my context, and at the same time, incredibly foreign. And as people have kind of been discovering the channel and stumbling across the videos, some of you still might be asking, who is this guy? Why is this pastor so interested in making these videos exploring Mormonism? Shouldn't he be focusing on preaching sermons or pastoring his church? Those are valid questions. And I've told my story on podcasts and other channels, but I've never really explained on Hello Saints how I got here and what led me to this point. So I grew up right in the middle of the Midwest, just outside of St. Louis, and I was raised in a family that was very religious in one sense, but my parents raised me and my brothers to think beyond religion. So we would be at church every Sunday morning and a lot of Sunday nights and even on Wednesday evenings, and we would serve a lot in the church. But if there was one thing my parents instilled in me over and over again, it was this idea that we don't just want to be religious, but we want to understand what it means to take God up on his invitation to be in relationship with him through his son, Jesus. And that really was my heritage. That was interwoven into my DNA as I was growing up. And then when it came time for college, I went away to college to a university called Greenville University in Illinois, which was a Free Methodist Christian university. And the culture and the focus at Greenville went beyond academics. In fact, there was a big emphasis on spiritual formation, again, to really understand what it means to be in relationship with God through Jesus. And if you know anything about the Methodist denomination, it's tied to the Wesleys. And these were individuals who came out of the Enlightenment as they were establishing the Methodist Church and really encouraged people who were seeking God to make sure they understood what they believed and why they believed it. And sure enough, I had a lot of classes and a lot of religion professors who were constantly challenging me and my fellow students to make sure that we were asking questions about what we believe and why we believe it, and to be informed about other faiths around us. In fact, we were required to go on a trip up to Chicago, where we visited an Episcopal church, a Jewish synagogue, an Islamic mosque, and a giant mega church called Willow Creek. And what it did is it pushed all of these evangelical students out of their comfort zones to understand other contexts in a way that would help us as individuals really consider what we believe and why we believe it, and to also be aware of what other people believe. I think you could see this as a pretty important ingredient that eventually factored into my desire to launch Hello Saints. My undergrad focus was in audio and video production, and when I graduated college, I worked in radio, I actually did a little bit of work in TV, and then I worked at an online marketing firm where I was very much immersed in the corporate world. And after about 5 or 6 years in that environment, I very much started to feel that the idea of climbing a corporate ladder and always driving toward a bottom line felt very hollow and empty to me. And I really felt the Lord stirring me and inviting me to pursue opportunities that might have more of an eternal impact. So I began to consider going into ministry. Now, in an evangelical context, what that means is vocationally or even bivocationally committing yourself, maybe even your career, to working in the church or for a church. I was very close to the pastor at the church I grew up at. He and I started talking, and I was hired at the church I grew up at to function in sort of an administrative role overseeing ministries, but very quickly that turned more into a pastoral focus. And what I mean by pastoral is spending more time engaging not just with the programs of the church, but with the people, wanting to be involved in teaching classes, preaching sermons, and even being involved in one-on-one discipleship opportunities where I'm helping people understand the Word of God. And while working in this context, making a living, I was also going through certain programs like ordination, which is essentially a track that I went through with my denomination to officially become a pastor and to get a ministry license. And I went to seminary, which is essentially grad school for pastors, where I focused on biblical studies at Moody Theological Seminary in Chicago. And there was about 10 years in there where that's what I was doing. I was working in the church, I was getting ordained, I was going to grad school, I was preaching sermons, and everything in me was anticipating that I was now on a lifelong career track to be a pastor. In the meantime, I was doing some side video work with some friends who had launched a video production company because that's what my undergrad was in, and I needed a bit of a creative outlet. FAO shorts, Target toys, 4 in the morning? Okay. Quiet on the set, except for Colin. So I was helping them start this video production company on the side and helping them make cool commercials for cool products and working with cool people. And then I would go back to the church and I would preach sermons and classes. If your deeds reveal that you're putting your faith in your own strength and actions rather than on the actions of Christ on the cross, it's not a saving faith. In the middle of all this, we actually had this idea that you can see as yet another ingredient that led to Hello Saints. It was an idea we had in about 2018 to make a YouTube channel that answered people's questions that they were asking about Christianity. And we were gonna call it, Why Do Christians? And this is what it looked like. Hey, I've got a question for you. You have questions about Christianity? I mean, have you ever asked, why do Christians baptize? Why do Christians celebrate Easter? Why are Christians so boring? Why does it seem like every Christian I know votes Republican? Why are Christians so quick to accept this idea, this concept of a loving God who sends people to hell? If you've ever wondered these things, you're probably not alone. And that's where we come in. You see, the purpose of this channel is to help provide answers and insights into some of your most begging questions regarding Christian belief, Christian living, Christian worship, Christian stereotypes. So I hope you come loaded with questions and curiosity about faith, because this is Why Do Christians? So we never followed through on this, but this idea was always in the back of my mind. Then the pandemic hit, and everything started to change a little bit. The deck started to get shuffled. I started to go through my very own introspective inventory about my life as everything stopped in the pandemic. And everything that we knew as normal started to change. So then I started to question whether this path that I was on as a career pastor was really the only thing that I was feeling drawn to do. And there were a couple things that happened during the pandemic that really contributed to this. One was the need for us to do video church because we couldn't gather together. Yeah, I mean, this is an unprecedented time. We, in our lifetime, have not experienced something like this. And usually the unknown is a root to a lot of fear. So here I was in this video production studio that I helped my friends run, while also preparing sermons and recording these sermons and editing them together and releasing them every week so that we could have church. And how he prayed 3 times that the Lord would remove this thorn of the flesh. What is the response that God has for Paul? My grace is sufficient. And after a few weeks, I started to think, I kind of like this. Mixing sort of this creative video production side with this passion that I have for faith and walking alongside people spiritually. Another thing that happened during the pandemic was my family and I went out west to check out a bunch of national parks just to get out of the house because we had been doing the whole quarantine rhythm for a few months. And I was having a conversation with a friend in Salt Lake City who said, hey, if you're wanting to do something different in ministry, you should consider Utah because it is very unique out here. And what she meant by that as an evangelical is that there's an LDS presence in Utah that makes it very different than anywhere else in the country. And when she said LDS, my response was, what's an LDS? I knew that there were Latter-day Saints in Utah, or what I called Mormons, but I didn't know they were LDS. I didn't know how many there were. I didn't know how much Latter-day Saint culture sort of defined that area. And something really interesting happened on this trip that I didn't know was significant at the time, but looking back, I see it. When we were with these friends, we went to a place called Antelope Island, which is an island right in the middle of the Great Salt Lake. And as we were leaving Antelope Island, I got a phone call from my buddies where I run this video production company. And I pulled over and I was talking to them, and we had secured a contract that would allow me to work in a greater role with them. And all of this was setting the stage for me to have more capacity, more time, even more production experience that would lay the groundwork for what would eventually become Hello Saints. In fact, when I got this phone call, I took a picture where I was sitting at this exact moment, and here's that picture. I'm literally sitting in the Great Salt Lake, not knowing that 5 or 6 months from this point, all the pieces would come together and this idea of Hello Saints would begin to emerge in my heart and in my mind. But at that moment, I didn't know that. We went home. I continued to be pandemic pastor, preaching sermons, editing videos, trying to walk a body of believers through a pandemic. And it really wasn't until early in 2021 that I began to think more about this idea, this intrigue I had with this group of people out west that in one sense seemed so familiar and in another sense seemed so foreign. And I began to make phone calls to different pastors and ministry leaders in the Utah area, and they would explain to me how unique the spiritual climate is out in Utah and how it really is like nothing else you're going to see in the Midwest or in the Bible Belt. And I began to read books about Latter-day Saint history and Latter-day Saint beliefs. And I began to realize that there really is a huge divide between evangelicals and Latter-day Saints, that we don't even really talk to each other. Yeah, we might debate where we're different, but for the most part, there's not a whole lot of dialogue that takes place. Most evangelicals I know very little, if anything, about Latter-day Saints. And at the same time, I was finding out that most Latter-day Saints aren't going to feel comfortable knocking on the door of a church and sitting down and having a conversation with a pastor about beliefs outside of Latter-day Saint doctrine. And as I'm considering all these things, I actually started to take more trips out to Utah. In fact, on one of those trips in the summer of 2021, I was on a hike in Brighton sometime in July around Pioneer Day, and I overheard an exhausted woman say to her friend, "Oh, if the pioneers can do it, I can do it." And I initially was feeling very critical of that statement because I knew that she was tying it to her faith heritage, which I didn't totally agree with. And as you've probably heard me tell the story before, it was in that moment that I caught myself and I basically said, stop being so critical. Maybe instead of writing this person off, be curious, understand the story of pioneers, understand her faith. Fight the criticism that's welling up inside of me with curiosity. Even if I disagree with this woman, that doesn't mean that I have to roll my eyes. That doesn't mean that I can't regard her with dignity. And as all of these experiences were coming together, that's when this idea of Hello Saints began to emerge. A YouTube channel where I'm chronicling my journey as an evangelical pastor, learning everything I can about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, reacting to some of those things as I learn, and also sharing my perspective from an evangelical pastoral standpoint. Hello, Saints. Welcome to this channel. Allow me to introduce myself. Fight criticism with curiosity. And when I launched the channel, I wasn't expecting it to be anything more than a passion side project. I was expecting to get, at best, a few hundred views per video, which was fine with me. Why the LDS members settled in Nauvoo, why they left Nauvoo, and why they came back. And I got sucked into a TikTok feed the other day by a group called Saints Unscripted. Something that's in this store that you would never see in a Christian bookstore, and that is anything pertaining to. But the channel continued to grow and grow, and I began to realize this is an important conversation that we need to have. And we need to have this conversation differently than we've ever had it before.
If we could decide way we stop screaming at people and instead enter into the crowd and as opposed to holding up signs. It seems like a barrier.
I think this is going to be a friendly discussion. You're going down, Snow.
What sort of a life are you going to have in that reality?
Which is why on one hand, a lot of people have been interested in these videos, but it also has come with its criticism. I've had plenty of Latter-day Saints who have been incredibly appreciative for the way in which I'm going about this. And I've been super happy to learn from them and to build relationships with so many Latter-day Saints. But there are some who have accused me of being a wolf in sheep clothing, or even some who have accused me of being on the church's payroll. And those criticisms haven't just come from Latter-day Saints. In fact, some of my most intense detractors have been my fellow evangelicals, who are so used to coming to this conversation with an apologetics agenda to prove Latter-day Saints wrong. And it's confusing to some that I'm taking a more curious relational approach. And even though some haven't totally understood the conversation, the vast majority of people watching Hello Saints videos are super intrigued and super kind and reciprocating this whole fighting criticism with curiosity and helping me understand something that I've never understood before, but also hearing me out as I explain things that a lot of Latter-day Saints haven't heard or understood before. Even with all that, there still might be a lot of people that are still asking the question, yeah, but why? And I think the best way for me to answer this is to point to a video that I recorded for Hello Saints a few months after I launched the channel. and I never released it. It was an invitation that was extended to me to go to Nauvoo, Illinois, which if you're a Latter-day Saint, you know what Nauvoo is. And I was invited up to Nauvoo to be a part of an archaeological dig. And it was on a site where there was a famous Latter-day Saint periodical or newspaper that was printed in a building that once stood there. The invitation was extended. I was able to meet a new friend in Stephen Pinecker, and also a Latter-day Saint who's become a great acquaintance, Rick Bennett. And I was also hanging out with individuals from the community of Christ, but I didn't really know what this video was going to be. All right, so I just pulled into Nauvoo, and if I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm a little nervous just because I've already been here. I've already done a video here, and I don't know what this video is gonna be. And as the sun set and I turned off my camera and I drove back to the St. Louis area, I thought to myself, I don't really have anything here. And I took all the footage and I threw it on a hard drive, and I hadn't thought about it since. Until recently, as I've been anticipating the 1-year anniversary of Hello Saints, I began to contemplate this footage again, and I'm realizing why that trip was so important. For that day and for that brief moment, I was invited to enter into a story.
So as we were coming down, we were breaking the dirt down and exposing.
Which I think is about
Stories are sacred because we all live our lives desiring to tell a story. The decisions that you make, the decisions that I make, are all part of a grand narrative that we are desiring to piece together so that whenever our time ends on earth, our lives can tell a story that we want to tell. And in the middle of it, sometimes it feels messy. Sometimes we feel lost. Sometimes we wander into areas that seem foreign. And that's exactly how I felt in Nauvoo. It seemed messy, literally. There was dirt everywhere. I felt a little bit lost because I didn't know what I was doing. It seemed very foreign because this was not a context I was used to. And yet, for that day, I was able to enter into the story of Latter-day Saint history and interact with individuals from the community of Christ, connect with friends like Stephen and Rick. And even though I didn't have a banger YouTube video to account for it, it was a privilege to be there. And that's what Hello Saints has become, a privilege to be here. To enter into the story of Latter-day Saints, to understand it. I'm not just seeing this monolithic religion. I'm seeing mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters. And yes, it's true, I don't agree with many things that the Latter-day Saint Church teaches. If I did, I would be a Latter-day Saint. But we can still build relationship. And ultimately, and most importantly, we have the opportunity to consider a story that is so much bigger than ours. Because it is my belief that this existence is not our story. It's God's story. He's the main character. We're the supporting cast. And as we're walking through this world that can oftentimes be dark, where we can oftentimes feel lost, by fixing our eyes on Him and understanding His heart and understanding His story and where we fit into all of that is a worthy endeavor. I will continue to maintain my passionate belief in what the Bible teaches about God and about Jesus. I will continue to rally around my #1 desire to get to the spiritual reality of anybody who's watching these videos, or even my own spiritual reality. But most importantly, I'm going to continue to drive at understanding and sharing what I understand so that we can drive at an understanding of Jesus that's rooted in truth. That's the why behind Hello Saints. That's the story that I want to understand. That's the story that I want to be a part of. And it's also the story that I want to continue to tell. Which is why a year into this, I think it's fantastic that it feels like I'm just getting started. That I'm standing on the tip of the iceberg of ideas that I have for this channel as I continue to desire to understand and be understood. And why I think it's important that we continue this conversation. I am grateful for all of you that have been so supportive, all of the new Latter-day Saint friends that I have personally been connecting with, that I believe will be lifelong relationships, and to understand where we fit in this divine cosmic story as we walk out our relationships in faith. So I hope you'll continue on this journey with me. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, like this video, and if you want to support me on Patreon, feel free to do that so I can continue to make these videos. So until next time, let's keep going, Saints.